In the U.S. Coast Guard's over 200-year-old history, only one of its members has ever been awarded the Medal of Honor. Signalman First Class Douglas Munro earned the decoration posthumously in September 1942 at Guadalcanal, one of the most arduous and dangerous campaigns in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Munro's role was to serve as a signalman and coxswain leading Marines ashore, but when asked to go above and beyond during a landing at Lunga Points, Munro reportedly responded, quote, "Hell yes." Munro was instructed to retrieve besieged Marines trapped on the beach by a fierce Japanese assault. Without hesitation, he piloted his landing craft into a defensive position and manned a .30 caliber machine gun to lay down suppressing fire as other boats extracted the stranded Marines. And when one of the landing crafts got stuck on a sandbar, Munro swung his own ship directly in the line of fire as a shield between the Marines and the Japanese forces as they stormed the beach. The Coast Guard's participation in amphibious operations during World War II was probably the most critical job the service performed. It fully staffed more than 350 naval ships, 21 cargo and attack cargo ships, 75 freighters, and 31 transports. They also served as nearshore pilots on 800 cutters, nearly 300 ships for the Army, and thousands of amphibious assault craft. During these water-to-land operations, the Coast Guard played its most important role during the war, getting soldiers to the beaches safely and providing support. The Coast Guard had an important role even before Guadalcanal. They participated in pre-war neutrality patrols escorting Allied convoys in the Atlantic years before the U.S. joined the war. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Coast Guard high-endurance cutter Cheney was notably the last warship floating that took part in the defense. Its crew installed an anti-aircraft barrage against the enemy and did harbor and anti-submarine patrols alongside the Navy. The 6-month battle for Guadalcanal in 1942 was the first real test all Americans faced against the Japanese Imperial Army. It was the first Allied amphibious operation of World War II, and a land laboratory where the Navy could test the latest tactics and technologies. 1 year after Pearl Harbor in 1942, the Coast Guard's USS Wakefield brought Allied troops to Singapore and evacuated civilians before shooting down the first enemy aircraft encountered there. The largest Coast Guard ships were the transports, and they were of vital importance in landing operations. Still, the small craft operations were just as crucial and were often overlooked. They carried assault troops from the offshore transports and brought in reinforcements and supplies. Managing small boats in the surf was challenging, and men in the Navy weren't usually skilled in their handling. As Coast Guard coxswains were usually the most seasoned small boat handlers in the entire government service, their contributions to amphibious operations were fundamental. In June 1941, their experience was especially important during the training exercises for said operations. There, the Coast Guard surfmen trained Navy coxswains in learning all the nuances that came with controlling small boats. The training took place in the Chesapeake Bay, near Solomons, Maryland, and on the North Carolina coast at Onslow Bay. The Guadalcanal campaign, codenamed Cactus, also marked the beginning of a tight relationship between the U.S. Marine Corps and the Coast Guard that still exists today. A Coast Guard coxswain or a beachmaster was often the last person a Marine would see before heading into unknown enemy territory. Douglas Albert Munro was born in October 1919 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. His family relocated to the small town of Clay Elum, Washington, when he was 2 years old. The Munros were more fortunate than most families during the Great Depression. Aware of his privilege, helping others in need became Munro's passion. This ultimately set off his interest in pursuing a path with the U.S. Coast Guard. In August 1939, Munro enlisted with the Coast Guard, and on September 18th, he was an official apprentice seaman. That same day, he met Raymond J. Evans, another recruit. They quickly became the best of friends, inseparable. They were almost always stationed together, and were even referred to as the Gold Dust Twins. Coast Guard training during the late 30s was almost non-existent. The two friends and 18 other recruits were sent to Air Station Port Angeles. On September 21st, the Coast Guard cutter U.S CGC Spencer selected Munro and Evans as crew. Their training would be hands-on. Both men would work as crew members aboard the Spencer ship, which was sent to participate in neutrality patrols in the Atlantic Ocean, traveling from Washington to Staten Island. Munro and Evans were made quartermasters and learned deck equipment maintenance, navigation, and log keeping. While on the neutrality patrols, they began to train for the signalman rate. They had to learn and perfect Morse code messaging via telegraph and blinker light, work signal flags and messages codification. The friends worked tirelessly together to earn their rating. In September 1940, they officially became signalmen third class. In the summer of 1941, the friends trained to become coxswains for landing craft, first with small boats and then with Transport Division 17. Over the rest of the year, they moved between transport ships and worked together every single day. When the United States joined the war in December 1941, Munro knew that they would soon go into an actual battle. Their training continued as they prepared the material for ships bound for the Pacific Theater. In July 1942, Munro was transferred to the USS Macaulay, while Evans remained aboard the Hunter Liggett, the first time the friends had ever been separated. However, both of them would be heading into the Pacific soon. On August 7th, 1942, American forces landed on Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and the Florida Islands in the Solomon Islands. Munro landed Marines on Tulagi. After several back-and-forth trips, Munro grabbed his signalman's gear, which included a blinker light and semaphore flags. He then set up a beach station to communicate between the shore Marines and the ships out on the sea. The young man spent all night on the island with Marines, sending messages via the blinker light. The next day, he evacuated casualties back to the USS Macaulay. After reporting back to his superiors, he learned he would be transferred to Guadalcanal, joining a boat pool crew. He'd reunite with Evans, his best friend. During August and September, Munro and Evans lived in a makeshift shack on the island, moving supplies, rescuing injured airmen, and ferrying casualties back to their ships. By September, Marine forces needed to move closer to the western side of the island. Japanese forces had withdrawn there as well, attempting to dominate the area and get closer to American lines. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, moved closer to the west for what should have been an exploratory mission, but quickly ran into trouble. The elements of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, joined them on September 25th. On September 27th, an ambiguous message sent from the group led leading division headquarters to believe that they had crossed the island's main river and were fighting against the Japanese there. They ordered 3 companies of 1st Battalion, 7th Marines ashore by a landing craft on a beach west of Point Cruz to join the attack from the rear of the island. Munro was put in charge of 10 Higgins boats, assigned to land the Marines. When they were heading towards the shore, Munro noticed a reef 1,000 yards away and led the fleet of landing craft around it. This put the Marines about 100 yards off their landing target. Just an hour later, the Higgins boats had beached, deposited the men, and were on their way back to Lunga Points. However, the boat's crew received a message that the Marines needed to be pulled back immediately. Munro volunteered to navigate the same landing craft back to the beach to rescue the Marines. When they arrived at the meeting point, the boats came under fierce fire. One coxswain tried to convince Munro that rescue was impossible, but he refused to give up. He positioned his landing craft parallel to the shores so that Evans could provide covering fire for the Marines. At the same time, Munro held station as the men swam frantically towards the landing craft. After all the Marines, including the wounded ones, were safely off the island, Munro turned his boat to return to Lunga Point. But he noticed another landing craft was stuck on a reef, and he spent several minutes freeing it and blocking enemy fire. Then Evans noticed a trail of waterspouts nearby as Japanese bullets got closer and closer to the boats. He yelled to his best friend to get down, but it was too late. The Marines were safe, but Munro wasn't. On their way back to Lunga Point, Evans jumped down to Munro, who asked, quote, "Did they get off?" After Evans replied that they did, and that everyone was safe, Signalman First Class Douglas Albert Munro passed away a hero. In a letter written by his superiors, Munro was described as, quote, "the true type of American manhood that will win this war." The Marine officer who ordered the attack where Munro perished, Colonel Puller, nominated the Guardsman for the Medal of Honor. The nomination was endorsed by Admiral William Halsey Jr., and President Franklin D. Roosevelt approved it. On May 24, 1943, the medal was presented to James and Edith Munro, Douglas's parents. The citation reads, quote, "By his outstanding leadership, expert planning, and dauntless devotion to duty, he and his courageous comrades undoubtedly saved the lives of many who otherwise would have perished. He gallantly gave up his life in defense of his country." Just hours later, Mrs. Edith Munro swore an oath and joined the Coast Guard in honor of her courageous son. At 48 years old, she went through boot camp and earned a commission in the Spars, the women's branch of the Coast Guard. Edith ran the Coast Guard barracks in Seattle and was discharged in 1945 as a lieutenant. Munro's legacy has lived on for decades, inspiring generations of men and women in service. Puller, the man who nominated Douglas Munro, went on to become one of the most decorated members of the Marine Corps. He is remembered and honored by every Coast Guard member for his selfless commitment to duty and heroism. Numerous ships, buildings, and monuments have been dedicated to Munro. A street in his hometown of Clay Elum, Washington, is named after him. As of 2020, Munro is the only member of the U.S. Coast Guard to ever receive the Medal of Honor.